Hi, and welcome to Academic Writing. This is tip number 3, and today we are going to be talking about your audience. I'm Lee Hall, and I am an Associate Professor of Literacy Studies at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. All right, so once you understand what it is that you're writing, and you need to think about who is it that you are writing for? Who is your primary audience? Now, if you're in a class, and you're turning in a paper for a grade, then obviously you're going to think your teacher, your professor, right? Maybe some of your peers in your class might be your audience, but if you're doing it just for grades, probably right, the professor or the teacher. Then if you're writing obviously for publication, then you might think, well, it's the people that read this journal, right? And that's a start, okay? But because clearly you need to have that general that general audience in mind, but then you need to start thinking about your writing, and you don't want to do this right away, right? This is, you want to write your draft, you want to start getting it polished, but at some point what you want to do is transition into thinking about looking at your writing from your audience's point of view, okay? What things do they need to know to understand your piece? What information is missing that you might think is really elementary and doesn't need to be there, but actually they need it there in order to understand your larger points. What things do you have in there that would confuse them? Maybe they need to come out. Maybe you just need to contextualize it a little bit more. So once your piece is starting to be refined, you really need to hone in and start thinking about not reading it from your own perspective, but reading it from the perspective of somebody who might know very little or have very limited information about what you're writing. And you want to then include the kinds of information that they need in order to comprehend your piece really well. Now, I'm going to give you an example here, and for this example, I'm going to take you to something very simple that we deal with all the time. I'm going to show you a grocery list. So I was buying the groceries, and my boyfriend had written out some things that he wanted recently, and this is an example of things that he included on his list. He wanted protein bars, he wanted green beans with almonds, he wanted a quarter pound of cheddar cheese, and he wanted 4 pork chops. Now, to him, this was very straightforward. He knew exactly what all of these things meant, all right? And you might look at it and you may not know what he meant, all right, but you might have an interpretation which may or may not match what he meant, right? Because he's not super clear here, and I'll show you why. So protein bars, he's lucky. I know what his favorite protein bars are. He doesn't need to provide me with any more information, right? I can go buy them. If they're out of them, I know what like a good backup one is. So I have that information. He can get away with writing protein bars. All right. And you're thinking about, I'm the audience. I'm the person that's got to go get the product. He's got to communicate to me what it is that he wants. Okay. Protein bars does that. Green beans with almonds. Again, I know what this is. I know where to find them. He doesn't have to have any concerns about that. And then we get down to the cheddar cheese. Well, he wanted the cheddar cheese from the deli. So I went to the deli and they presented me with all kinds of options for cheddar cheese, right? Mild, sharp, extra sharp. What kind did he want? I didn't know. So I just made a guess, right? Now he could decide that that's important, and in the future he could add that in, sharp cheddar, mild cheddar, whatever, right? But where this really hit home for me was when it came time to go get pork chops. And here's why. I don't eat meat. I don't cook meat. I haven't eaten or cooked meat in probably 5 years. So I thought I understood what he meant by pork chops, and I wandered over to purchase pork chops for him. And I noticed that there were all these different cuts of pork chops. There was a bone-in, there was like a butterfly cut, there was a loin chop. There was like at least 4 different kinds of pork chops. And I tried to contact him and he wasn't available, so I didn't get the pork chops, right? So for him, right, 4 pork chops, probably very clear because he would walk right up to the case and take a look around and he would know what he wanted and he would see it and he would get it and he would go. But in this case, as the primary audience member here of the grocery list, right, I had absolutely no idea, right? When I was hit with this, I realized I don't have enough information here to understand what it is that he wants, okay? And that's what you're trying to not do in your writing, right? You're trying to see things through the eyes of your audience as best as you can, in a reasonable manner, and then head off any comprehension problems that they might have, right? So if he was thinking about this from my perspective, right, he could have thought, well, she doesn't eat meat, she doesn't cook meat, she normally doesn't purchase meat, So maybe I need to be a little bit more specific about pork chops. On the other hand, he knows this so well, right? He knows the concept of pork chops and what it means to buy a pork chop so well that he probably didn't even realize that I was going to run into these comprehension issues when I hit this point in the shopping trip, right? So that's something to be aware of too, because you know your paper, you know your content better than anybody else, right? So because of that, you end up with blinders on and you may not know, right, what you don't know. So it can be helpful, right, to have people with actually very limited information read your paper in advance and give you some feedback on it and tell you places where they were confused. So I'm going to give you one more quick example. We're going to wrap up here. When I was a doctoral student, I had a writing group. And in my writing group, we had a woman whose background was in math education. Now, she was in that group intentionally because she had very limited knowledge about, for example, the papers that I was writing on literacy. I had very limited knowledge about what she was writing in math education. So I remember once I gave her a paper to read and she said, like, I don't know anything about reading comprehension, but I understand this paper. And so that was a really good sign to me because it meant that I had written it in a way that people with very limited information could comprehend and understand at least some of the bigger points, maybe not some of the finer nuanced things, but some of the bigger ideas. They weren't walking away from it being completely confused and frustrated. And so that's what you want to aim for. All right, so if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. My email is here. I've got a blog as well, leahall.wordpress.com, where I write about issues in teaching in higher education.